right, it's racial justice, equity, and anti-racism.
Okay.
I stole that from your LinkedIn.
Okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Aubrey Tang from the Chinatown Project, and you're watching Lunch Break. It's a series where we sit down, share a meal, and get to know local Asian Americans making a difference in their communities. Today, I'm joined by Bae Kupel. Nate is a current vice chairperson for the Massachusetts Asian American Pacific Islander Commission. He's a board member for the Boston Post-Adoption Resources Group. He's also the director of youth programs for Youth Build Just to Start. He's a highly experienced nonprofit leader whose work centers around anti-racism, equity, and social justice. Nate, we're so happy to have you today.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks so much.
So why did you decide to choose Crave to do your interview today?
Oh, I love this place. The fried chicken here is amazing. This is like one of my favorite restaurants to go. My wife and I, we're friends. It's just, chicken is great. That's all, hands down.
That's your favorite. Do you have a favorite flavor?
It depends. Usually we do half and half when we come. A little bit of spicy, a little bit of the soy garlic. Yeah.
So what are you thinking? I know you have your usual favorites, but you should try something
a
little bit new.
Gosh, I don't know. It's like we were saying earlier, this menu is huge. There's so many different things. We've got sushi.
Is there something on here where you're like, I would never normally try that?
Let's see.
All right, so Nate, I know that you grew up in a small town in Maine, and something that you've said is you were really the only person that looked like you there. So, what was that like to grow up in a sort of predominantly white town?
Yeah, so I grew up in a town called Scarborough, which is kind of right outside of Portland. Have you ever been to Portland before?
I have.
Okay,
I have,
all right. So a little bit outside of Portland, and yeah, I think I was maybe one of maybe 6 people of color in my high school. Not many Asian Americans. I think it's just pretty much in my neighborhood. It was like me and my 2 younger siblings who were the only Asians in the neighborhood, and they're also adopted as well. So I was adopted from Korea. They were adopted from Taiwan and Vietnam. So yeah, I think it was hard, as a transracial adoptee as well. Just there's so much like identity development that happens when you're a kid, and it's hard when you don't have a lot of people who look like you to kind of help you see yourself in others and see yourself reflected back at you. And so, I think that was a really difficult thing. You kind of internalize some of the feelings that you have when you don't have people looking like you. So it was tough, and I think what was toughest about it is that I didn't even know what it was that I was feeling until I got older. When I moved out of Scarborough, when I went to college, I went to UMass Amherst, and it was really the first time I had like a really diverse group of friends, and it was through that and through some of my studies. I started as a jazz major, but then I switched.
Wow.
Yeah, I play drums, so that's the other thing. I switched later on to do sociology and Asian American studies, and it was really there. It was kind of the learning and getting the labels and sort of like the names for things that I was experiencing as a kid that really kind of helped me figure out where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. And it really was kind of this feeling of wanting to do service, like some type of service, community work, anti-racism training, because that was something that really impacted me as a kid in my own mental health. And so mental health was another thing that was super important to me as well. Looking back, it's always, hindsight's always 20/20, when you think back on these sort of things. My parents did the best job they could, right?
Yeah,
but it was tough. It was tough. I think it was, like, the real work for me came when I went to college. It was like when I didn't have to, for the first time where I really had to wear my identity on my sleeve, before everybody knew me because I was like one of the only Asians. So it's like, they knew my story. They knew I was an adoptee, right? But then in college, it was like constantly having to explain why my last name's Kupel, like what my identity is, what it means to be adopted.
All right, Nate, right, so food's here. Do you want to talk a little bit about everything we ordered?
Yes. Okay. So we got the fried chicken here, spicy, soy garlic.
Yep.
You can tell by the color. And then, I mean, we talked about ordering something unexpected off the menu, and okay. So this is carpaccio.
For the viewers.
It's a yellowtail carpaccio. I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but just order.
I don't know what it is.
Carpaccio, I believe, is Italian, and it's usually thinly sliced beef. Because it's raw, it's cooked with some type of an acid like lime juice or lemon juice, so that you can eat it raw. So I think, and I don't even remember exactly how this was prepared, but some type of spicy sauce, jalapeno, got some radish, and some type of a soy glaze, I think. But it's really good.
It looks so fancy.
It does.
It looks beautiful.
I wasn't expecting the presentation.
All right, so we also got some wonton mozzarella sticks, very Asian fusion. I feel like very fitting for this interview. And we got truffle fries as the crowd pleaser. Everybody likes those. And I just learned from you that actual truffle slices are much more mild than the truffle oil.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had super fancy, expensive ones, but I bought a jar that had pre-sliced truffles in it. It was like $20. It was like really expensive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I wanted to try it because I was just curious, and I make my own pasta, so that was a fun thing. And I put the slices on the top, and I just remember thinking, like, this is not, it's not as strong or as flavorful as I thought it was going to be, you know? But who knows? Maybe with an expensive one, I'd change my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, speaking of food, and you know, we're eating Korean fried chicken right now. And as a Korean adoptee, was food a way for you to reconnect with your heritage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely was. I'd say mostly in early adulthood in college, where I started to really kind of think about what it meant to be Korean American, Asian American. My adoptive mother cooked a lot when I was little, and you know, she would bake homemade bread all the time. She would make all kinds of things. So it was always fun, exciting, and you know, as an adult, I think not having the experience of really being able to connect authentically with my Korean identity, not having Korean parents or Korean friends really growing up. When I went to college and I started figuring out what it meant to be Korean American, Asian American, it was kind of a nice way to reconnect with what it meant to be Korean through food. So yeah, absolutely. Korean food is that way for me. I wish there were more Korean restaurants around here, though.
So Nate, you've had a lot of experience with nonprofit work, but you've also had experience in running for Malden City Councilor. So what was really your motivation for getting into policymaking? Yeah,
it's one of those things for a long time, my dad always said that I'd be a good politician just because I'm always wanting to connect with people and figure out the best way to move forward. And I think for me, last year, I mean, it was a combination of a lot of things, but I think just seeing how tough the pandemic has been on a lot of low-income communities, a lot of BIPOC and immigrant communities in Malden, especially. I mean, Malden is one of the most diverse cities in Massachusetts. In fact, I think this year has the most diverse high school in the state, and over 50% of the city is non-white, and one of the largest Asian American populations. I think it's 25% or something of all residents in Malden are Asian American. And we've never had a Malden City Councilor who's Asian American. I don't even think until recently we had never had a woman of color on the City Council in Malden. I think it was all of that, all of those things, and just seeing and thinking about how a city like ours is kind of in transition and trying to figure out how do we best serve a really diverse community. And as a result of that, of talking with others, I just decided that it was time to give it a shot. And I saw a lot of things that I wanted to help the city with and help residents with, and all kind of snowballed from there.
So can you explain a little bit about, if I'm interested in running for city councilor, what are the steps to actually do that?
Yeah, I think the first step is to talk to as many city councilors as you can, or people who have run for office before. There's a lot of, I would say that I think the most interesting thing of running for office is that you've got the job of running as a candidate, and then you have the actual job that you're trying to get, which is very different. And the two experiences, you have to be ready for both. And the best way to do that is talk to people who've done it before, because different towns and cities have slightly different processes, and there are some norms sometimes, like with relationship building, where you need to talk to certain people in the community, certain leaders, to really get their support and figure out how to build a campaign around it. But yeah, I'd say first step, talk to an elected official, ask them what it's like to run, ask them what it's like to be in office, what the job is like. And yeah, that's the first step, really.
To add on to that, after kind of determining what that process is like, what is it also actually like to be running and be in the middle of a campaign and building one?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the best way to explain it is it's like you're building a company from scratch, and the product that you're selling is yourself. And it's very weird. I mean, I think that's the part that's the weirdest, is kind of the centering of yourself as the person that is out there and who is, like, you have to build that support around yourself. And it's it's a little uncomfortable at first. But as I got into it, as I built out a team, it was a really interesting thing, because at a certain point, I remember there was kind of this transition where it was, I went from I to we. And you see that and you hear it from a lot of politicians, and sometimes it can sound a little bit, I don't know, like cliched or something, but you really do at a certain point realize that, and for me at least, like having the support of the Asian American community, having the support of community organizers and communities of color, you realize that it really isn't about yourself. It's about the idea of change, the possibility of having people who can reflect the values that you have for yourself.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized quickly was, it's like when you find, if you're just like a resident, and when you find somebody who represents your values, when you find somebody who represents how you want to take care of other people in your community, that can be really strong. And so that was, I think, one of the kind of transition was announcing I'm running, and meeting with a lot of people, meeting with city councilors, doing all of the nomination paperwork that you have to do, figuring out what the plan's going to be, figuring out who my team, the consultants were that I was going to work with, and then kind of making the personal transformation of going from, a private citizen to a candidate.
A public figure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We kind of talked a little bit about your race and how you were competing against somebody who had 8 years in the game and all of that time to develop that relationship. What was that like for you, and what was your strategy in that case? Yeah,
I mean, mostly it was just getting to know people, talking to as many people as I could, because so many people were familiar already with the current counselor, really just sharing who I was, why I was running, some of the issues and priorities that I cared about, and what I was hoping to do when I got elected. And so, yeah, it was just endless door knocking, phone calls, putting together a team that would help build out our field operations, be able to look at data and all of those things. There's a lot of work, to really build the relationships and have those conversations. Yeah, that was really the strategy from the beginning, was do as much as I could to connect with voters, with community leaders, public appearances at events, to show solidarity. And those are all things that you do as part of the job too, once you do get elected. So yeah, it was very relationally focused. It was very much building building a message that would appeal to as many people as possible, based on my values, and sticking to it as best as I could.
Something that I've heard a lot is that when you're running for whatever it is, you have to touch people at least 7 times before they kind of know that you're a candidate or consider you. For you, what was that process like? You know, that sounds really exhausting to have to constantly do phone banking, door knocking, public appearances. Were you, did it come naturally to you?
Well, I mean, it helped that when I made the decision to run, that I took an intentional break from work, so I was able to focus on the campaign full time. And it also helped that I was able to fundraise enough to get a campaign manager to really help run a lot of the operations of what we were trying to do. But yeah, I mean, it was, it does get pretty overwhelming because you have, I mean, I was fortunate to have a few different resources like Mass Alliance that helps progressive candidates who are running. They have a program for women and people of color who are running for office. And they do a lot of coaching and advice throughout your campaign, and a few others too. But yeah, I mean, every week we would have goals of how many doors we'd have to knock, how many phones we'd have to phone calls to make, and ultimately how many people who were on Team Nate, really, that you would have to hit to get to the numbers. And I think that was one of, the learnings was that there's a real science behind running a successful campaign that's based on numbers, and to do a really successful one, you have to focus a lot on the touches, right? And I mean, I think over the course of my campaign, we knocked somewhere maybe like 3,000 doors or something, repeatedly, right? Like, I can't remember how many times we made it through our voters. I think maybe in some cases maybe 5 or 6.
Wow.
It's a smaller ward, so we were able to knock more.
Right.
But people don't always answer either. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like you keep knocking doors until you talk to someone. They tell you if they like you or maybe undecided or something. But then there are just a lot of doors that just don't answer. And it's understandable with COVID. People didn't want to answer doors too. So that made it a little bit even more challenging. But yeah, it was definitely overwhelming. There were times where I just thought to myself, like, I can't understand how people do this while they're working full time.
Yeah.
Because to do it really well, to do it with all of the best practices and tips, you really do need a lot of focused time.
Gotcha. Outside of all of your campaign work, you're also a really experienced nonprofit leader. Can you explain a little bit more about how you got into the nonprofit world?
Well, I mean, I think it started in college when I was doing a lot of exploration around my identity and taking classes in sociology and Asian American studies. And that's actually where I met my wife as well, and she would kill me if I didn't say that. So there it is. I actually started a social justice magazine when I was in college called The Nexus magazine at UMass Amherst. And it was just like a really cool experience of connecting the issues that mattered to me, community-centered journalism, and eventually I was able to teach it as a class, which was really fun. And so I think that kind of pushed me a little bit into realizing that there are ways to combine some of the issues that I cared about in the real world, and that there are jobs and industries focus on all of these issues. I first started working at UMass Boston doing some public radio work, working on the first Asian American radio pilot program that went national. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
At the Institute for Asian American Studies there, where I did some community-based research as well. And while I was at the Institute, I got to do research on Asian adoptees, and one of the biggest things that came up was mental health around experiencing racism, the experiences of just growing up without having people that look like you on mental health. And I went to social work school. Mental health is also something I care a lot about, but I think generally over the course of the 16, 17 years, it's been really about trying to find opportunities where people can see themselves in others.
What does the future hold for you, Nate?
That's a great question. I will get back to you in 20 years. No. I think generally I want to continue to be a positive role model for young people, continue to do mission-driven work that is focused on racial equity, that's focused on economic justice. There's a lot of suffering that's happening in the world, and I'm firmly committed to doing everything that I can as a community organizer or in the nonprofit sector.
Nate, thanks so much for being on today. I really enjoyed learning more about your story, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds for you. I do have one last question, and that is, if you were writing an autobiography, what would you title this chapter of your life?
I think I would call it From Mirrors to Movements, and that's actually, I wish I could tell you that I just came up with that on the spot. That's something that
He's been thinking about it.
No, it was a blog that I ran for a little while because I've always felt that positive mirroring, seeing yourself on others, can be a force for social change, for movement building. And that's always been something that I've cared a lot about in all the work that I've done, whether it's mental health, whether it's in the adoptee community, whether it's in the Asian American community, was that there are positive interventions that just start with making you feel included, like you belong somewhere. So yeah.
Well, on that note, this is the end of this episode of Lunch Break. Again, thank you so much, Nate, for being on.
Thank you.
I want you to tell all the people where they can find you on social media.
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Nate Bae K, on Facebook as well, and TikTok, which is Nate for Malden.
Oh, he's on TikTok.
Yep, I'm on TikTok. It's not the most impressive. Maybe you all can help me with that. But I'd love to hear from folks. It's important work being in the community, and whether it's running for office or getting more involved. So I'd say for all of you out there, get involved locally. Find out who your elected officials are. Find out about the issues that impact the people in your backyard. Find ways to meaningfully connect with others in the work that you do. So thank you for having me.